Hello everyone, I'm JG and welcome back to Music Forever, where today I'm bringing you guys a brand new track review video where I get to talk about some recently released songs that I happen to hear and have some opinions on, just my own personal take, so if you happen to disagree, that's perfectly okay. Let's get started here with the first track I want to talk about, the new collaborative song between Taylor Swift and Brendon Urie of Panic! At the Disco. The reason I checked this track out was primarily due to Panic! At the Disco's involvement in it, because when it comes to Taylor Swift, I really can't consider myself much of a fan. Not that I really dislike her music overall, it's just that I feel mostly indifferent towards it on the whole, I guess. I mean, she does have some tracks from her that I don't like, but at the same time, for the most part, her music doesn't really inspire much of a reaction from me, I guess. So yeah, I mostly checked this out for the Panic! At the Disco collaboration. I was kind of interested to see what this would sound like, given that these two artists didn't seem like the most obvious choice for a collaboration by any means. However, after listening to this thing, it makes a lot more sense than I thought it would, and I don't necessarily mean that in a good way. The production and instrumental here on this track is something that doesn't feel all too far removed from Panic! At the Disco's last album, which, if you remember my review of that project, the instrumentation and the production was something on that album I didn't care for overall. I thought it made the album sound really sterile and uninteresting and lifeless, and the same does apply to this track. Though I will say, at the very least, that it does work better in the context of this track because Taylor Swift is a pop artist, so I guess it makes sense that she's going over some more pop-sounding instrumental. But still, this instrumental to this track is just not that interesting. It's not that exciting, sounds pretty overproduced, really sterile, just not exciting in the slightest. Both of Taylor and Brendon's vocal performances on this track are, okay-ish, I guess, would be the best way to say it. They're not awful necessarily, but at the same time they don't really have much energy to them or charisma or anything that's really all that standout at the end of the day. They don't really stick with me all that much. I will say at the very least that they have some adequate chemistry, I guess. They both kind of have a really over-the-top and theatric feel to the way that they're presenting stuff here on this track that I guess pairs up decently enough, or maybe it's just the fact that their performances are so average across the board here that there's really not much of a room for them to sound like they don't have much chemistry together. Yeah, the performances on this track were just not all that memorable to me. Probably the strongest part of the track overall, but still not all that great. But my least favorite part of this track is easily the lyrics, which just sound really simple and childish to me. Not childish in a good way, where it just feels really youthful and exciting. Childish in a way that feels like dumbed down and like made simple to appeal to kids. Especially some of the lyrics on the bridge of this track. Like, the bridge is some of the worst lyrics I've heard on a track this year. It kicks off with the wonderful lyrics that are, "Hey kids, spelling is fun." Like, if you ever find yourself putting that in a song and you're like dead serious about it, yeah, that's where you've messed up, really. Because the rest of this bridge isn't really much better, with them just making a bunch of like spelling related puns. Like, this song feels like I'm back in elementary school, like in the second or first grade or something, and I'm like in the middle of class and the teacher's showing one of those videos, like, the ones where they would pull out the old TV that was like super thick and they would shove in the VHS tape in there, remember those? And you'd have this video pop up, they'd have to rewind it and all. It would take like 10 minutes to set up because the teacher just doesn't know how to use the technology, but you didn't know how to use it either, so you just sat there for 10 minutes talking to your friends. And then when it finally started, you have like this weird 70s cartoon with singing characters singing about you how to spell or something. That's like what this song is from, with like a more modern polish, I guess. I'm sorry to go off on a tangent like that, but I feel like that's the best way of really describing the vibe that this track gives me. Something that overall I don't really care for. Outside of these really bad lyrics, there's just not a lot to this track that even sticks with me all that much. For like a lead single and a collaborative effort between two pretty big artists, this didn't leave much of an impression on me. And maybe it will leave a bigger impression on you if you're a fan of Taylor Swift, because like I said, I'm not really invested in her music career all that much. But even though I like Panic! At the Disco, this track did nothing for me overall. Yeah, I would say to avoid this track unless you're like a die-hard fan of any of the two artists involved, but in that case you probably already listened to this thing. And unless you also really happen to like spelling, because I guess people who like to spell need music too. Moving on, the next track that I want to talk about is this new track from Rammstein, Radio. Overall, I was pretty excited to hear what they were going to do with their next single, considering I like the first single that they dropped from their upcoming album quite a bit. And this one I think is another really solid track overall. Again, like the first single that they dropped, this one does feel a bit typical for the band in the sense that they're not really treading any new ground here. This is all stuff that you would probably come to expect from the band at this point. However, it's performed so solidly that, it doesn't even matter to me that this is really nothing new for the band, as I think this track is just a straight up, fun, enjoyable track. I love the really thick and crunchy guitar riffs on this track, and I also really love how the electronic elements are, mixed into this track as well, and how they kind of play together with the thicker, heavier guitar parts to create something that sounds really heavy, but at the same time kind of beautiful too. I also really love how catchy this track is as well. It has a monster of a chorus tied to it, an instant earworm, a track that I wish I could sing along to, but unfortunately I can't because as me speaking other languages tends to not go very well. But I will say, if I could speak the language, I would most certainly be singing along to this track because it is incredibly catchy. Overall, I don't think there's a ton to say about this track that can't really be summed up as just saying that it's a really solid song from these guys. Like, if you're familiar with their general sound, you know what this track is going to give you. However, like I said before, I don't mean that in a bad way. This is them doing their meat and potatoes sound, but doing it really well. I love how catchy the hook is on this track. I love all the guitar parts on this song and how nice and thick and heavy they sound. I love how everything else just plays together here with the instrumental of the track. It's overall a really solid song. Not a track I would say is necessarily one of the band's best or anything, but still a really solid track nevertheless. And yeah, this combined with the last single they dropped has me pretty excited to hear what they're going to be doing on this upcoming album of theirs. Definitely check this out. Next up, we're going to be talking about the newest track from Darkthrone, the Hardship of the Scots. I was pretty excited to hear what Darkthrone were going to do with this track, given that their last album was a bit of a return to form for them, going back to the black metal sound that made the band popular to begin with, as opposed to some of the more out there experimentation that they were doing prior to that with, more traditional heavy metal, some more punk leaning sounds as well throughout that time period. I was interested to see if they were going to continue down the path of, more traditional black metal. Were they going to kind of go back to experimenting? Was it going to be something else strange altogether? And overall, I would say that this is definitely leaning more towards having more experimentation in it than sticking true to, more pure black metal. However, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing overall. The sound of this track is one that encompasses a lot into it. However, I feel like it's all pulled together in a really nice package. The track kicks off with these guitar riffs that feel really inspired by like a more traditional heavy metal sound, like more similar to like Iron Maiden or Judas Priest or something like that. However, they do have this rough around the edges feel that you wouldn't really associate with those bands. It definitely gives it a unique vibe. And from there, the track does take some more interesting turns and twists. There are some segments on this track that sound a bit thrashier, a bit heavier, almost black metal-like, but maybe not quite necessarily there. Like, it kind of reminds me of some of the earliest bands in black metal during the time when, the lines between thrash, black, and death metal were all a bit blurrier, and, what exactly was what was a bit less clear overall. That's what this track kind of reminds me of to some extent, because you have elements of thrash metal on display here, some elements of black metal, and also some elements of doom metal, or just some sludgier, slower sounds as well. The vocals on this track also have a quality to them that kind of feels like a mixture of like thrash vocals and more black metal-like vocals. Never quite making it to be exactly sounding like one of those in particular, just kind of being this rough fusion of the two that I think sounds quite nice overall. I also really appreciate how this track, with its longer runtime, it never really feels all that cluttered, despite the fact that it's juggling all these different sounds. It always sounds natural. I like how each sound progresses from one to another, and it overall helps keep the track sounding really interesting once again, despite that longer runtime. This track goes on for about 7 minutes or so, however, it feels a bit shorter than that with how much is going on here. So yeah, overall I think this is a pretty solid track, a pretty interesting teaser. I'm wondering if the rest of this project is going to sound like this, because if so, I think it'll definitely be, at the very least, a pretty interesting project to listen to. So yeah, I would definitely check this out if you're a fan of Darkthrone or just extreme metal music in general. And with that said, that concludes today's track reviews. If you happen to have any opinions regarding any of these songs that are different than mine, that's perfectly fine. In fact, feel free to leave them in the comment section down below. And while you're down there, make sure you leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel for more music-related content, things like album reviews, track reviews, things of that sort. If you like that kind of content, make sure you subscribe. Thank you for watching once again, and stay golden.